was.
Oh,
So,
that's
all right.
awesome.
So hold that thought. So then, my mother-in-law was going to come to visit us, but she didn't want to take the TGV by herself from Paris to Avignon. So my husband had to go to Avignon to pick her up and then bring her back on the TGV. So that morning, I took the kids to school, and then I walked up to Monsieur Dudy's and to get my meat, and the shop was packed, and I had my little kid in my backpack. And the night before, we had had chicken, and I had some leftover chicken. So I had a chicken from him, and the kids hadn't eaten all the chicken, so I had some leftovers. And I thought, okay, I'll get 200 grams of steak haché, just chopped steak, and I'll make some chopped steak, and I'll do something with the chicken, and that'll be enough for the 5 of us, So I go in, chat, and I'm at the back of the shop, and Monsieur Dudy says, Madame, because he sees I have the baby, and he wants to help me, So he says, Madame, what would you like? And I said, 200 grams steak haché, 200 grams of chopped steak. Oh my God, he says, do you believe this? Her husband is in Paris picking up his mother. There will be 3 adults for dinner, 2 growing children. There will be 5 people, and she is going to feed them on 200 grams of steak haché. And I'm like, everybody turns and goes, incredible, incredible. And so everybody is staring at me, and they're all going, no, this cannot be,
Gosh.
And so I grab my French dictionary. I'm furiously looking through my French dictionary for the word for leftovers.
Right.
That I have a leftover chicken, There is no French word for leftovers. And I'm looking, and sweat is breaking out, and everybody is just, and Monsieur Dudy won't shut up. Can you believe that?
Oh, jeez.
2 children who are growing, who need more food. 200 grams. And the mother-in-law, she's going to feed the mother-in-law? And I'm like, okay, so I said, he said, good, and what will you be serving with that,
Oh,
And it's just
man.
like,
It's
so
like having
they
another
knew
mother.
everything. They knew everything about us, everything. So that's where the story comes from, is that there's that sort of level, on the same thing that there's this level of nosiness about French neighbors, there's also a level of, as you notice in the book, everybody is monsieur or madame. And that is, there's 2 ways of speaking to people. One is vous, which is more formal, or tu. So if I addressed you in the vous form, that would be very formal. If I addressed you in the tu form, we would be friends, and that would indicate that we were close friends. So everybody is monsieur or madame, monsieur, madame. Now my oldest son, who lives in Belgium, has been married for 7 years to a Belgian. They are French speaking. And our in-laws, we are still on vous with them. We have never been invited to be tu with them. And we share a 3-year-old grandson. But, isn't that interesting?
So we have stiff.
It's very, it's very, very formal. It's a very formal life. So learning all of those are things I would have never
Nuances,
learned as a tourist.
Exactly.
And
I love hearing these stories too.
And the whole thing about, but can you imagine being in the butcher shop, And
No.
then- right.
I mean, I can, and I want to imagine,
but
but
that-
yeah.
No. So anyway, so that was a long answer to a short question.
No, but that was wonderful. So to start off, Madame Renaud, am I saying that correctly? And
Madame
I
Renaud.
took 7 years of French in grammar
Yes.
school. Madame Renaud's complaining,
Right.
constant complaining, and she feels so bad that they have to eat this hard bread, and
Right, and she doesn't want to do that, right?
No. Tell us about the dog. Eating,
The
snake
dog
and
is the
dog.
inciting incident, yes. I could read a section if you like.
Yes, would you? Yes.
Yeah, and I'll read that section from my marked up book. The snake is what we would call the inciting incident, the thing that causes everything to happen in the book. There was no snake in the real life, and I'll tell you that up front. but there was a gypsy in the laundromat. But,
And gypsies is a big thing over there, isn't
yeah,
it?
gypsies is a
Yeah.
very big thing over there. Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can find the starting place. So, because they live very close and they know each other, so there's a small dog, Charm, who is next door, and she barks a lot. And then we have the Mistral coming. So, and we have.
Can you just explain what a Mistral is too?
A Mistral is a wind that comes through the Rhone Valley, and it's a very unusual wind, and it actually controls the weather of southern France. And it comes on suddenly. We experienced it. You know, you hear people talk about it, and you think, oh yeah, fine, whatever, it's just wind. It's not just wind. It lasts for days and days, and it can blow up to 80, kilometers an hour.
It's a beautiful name for a strong force.
Right, it is a
Yeah.
strong force, and it changes the weather,
Uh-huh.
but it's very odd in that the sky is perfectly blue. It's like almost an azure blue. It's very beautifully blue. And then you have this strong wind that literally will tear your laundry off of your clotheslines.
Wow.
And people are they're afraid of it, and it's like if the Mistral is coming, people do stay indoors more, because the weather does change. And the weather when Monique was young, when she was 10, she caught a cold from it, and it damaged, she had some paralysis in a leg from it, which that is something that could have happened because of that sudden drop in temperature and the bad weather. The other thing, which I don't discuss in this book, is that there's another wind that comes out of the Sahara Desert, because you have to understand southern France is south, and then Morocco is over, you can just cross over to Morocco, and there's a lot of Moroccans there. But there's another wind that comes from the Sahara that picks up that very, very fine yellow sand. And we were somewhere one day, it was actually Easter Sunday, and everybody indoors began talking about it was raining mud. And my French is okay, but it's not fabulous. And I turned to my husband, I said, they're saying that it's raining mud. And he said, oh, you've got that wrong. I said, oh, no, they're saying, it pleut, and it's raining mud. And I'm like, okay. We go outside, every building, every car, everything is covered in yellow mud.
Wow.
And the sand gets picked up and then gets dumped on southern France, and it rains mud. So anyway, the Mistral is a very forceful thing. So Monique is waking up in the morning, and she all of a sudden realized that she doesn't hear the little dog next door barking. Okay? So what has happened to our dear Charm? Monique asked, coming into the dining room and taking her seat at the table. I had planned to tell you yesterday, but thought it was not a good thing to hear right before going to sleep. What happened? First, let me say, one can only assume the story is true because I first heard it from Madame Pecot herself. But you know how excitable she can be and how she cared for Charm, like it was her child, and of course, to lose a child is a terrible thing. Yes, Monique agreed. But the story is almost too fantastic to believe, which is why I didn't rush to tell you. Well, Monique prompted. If you must know, Madame Renaud pushed her seat next to Monique and bent her head close so she could speak softly. Madame Pecot believes Charm was eaten by a snake. A snake? I told you it was too fantastic to believe. Anyway, Monsieur Duncan, who rents Madame Delacourt's house, told Madame Delacourt he was a herpetologist at the university, which is what Madame Delacourt told Madame Pecot when he moved in. It is only right that Madame Pecot should know who lives next to her. As you have seen yourself, Monsieur Duncan is young, and although he is balding quite badly in the front, he lets what little hair he has left on his head grow to all extremes and wears it in a ponytail down his back. It is rather thin and not too attractive. Madame Pecot says she has seen him out on his patio on more than one occasion, brushing his hair like a maiden drying it in the sun. In any case, other than drying his hair out on his patio, Monsieur Duncan has not bothered Madame Pecot, but Madame Pecot's beloved Charm has bothered Monsieur Duncan. When Charm has awakened him in the middle of the night with her incessant barking, he and Madame Pecot have had words. As you well know, once Charm gets going, she can get on your nerves. Perhaps if Monsieur Duncan had taken the time to make friends with Charme, to feed her some scraps from his table or toss her a piece of stale bread every now and then, this thing would not have happened. But to wonder what would not have happened if two people would have been sensible about a thing is to waste good thoughts. For it seems neither Monsieur Duncan nor Madame Picot acted sensibly. Monique was anxious to hear more about the snake, but waited patiently while her mother spread out the story like fresh linen on their table. You have probably noticed that recently Madame Picot has started leaving Charme in the garden at night, and the dog has been barking. How could I not notice? Monique replied, hoping to move the story along. Well, about 2 weeks ago, I saw Madame Picot at the butcher's, the one downtown where they have those lovely tiny lamb chops they stuff with rosemary and mint, and she told me then that Monsieur Duncan kept snakes in his house. I didn't believe it, of course, but then she told me that Thursday evening 2 weeks ago, Monsieur Duncan came home carrying a pillowcase that looked like it was stuffed with clothes. When Madame Picot saw him walking with this bundle, she stopped him and asked, as any good neighbor would ask, if there was anything wrong with his washing machine. That's when he showed her the snake. What snake? The snake he was carrying in the pillowcase. It was one of the snakes from his laboratory at the university. He said it was sick, and he was bringing it home in hopes that he could take care of it. That's why Madame Picot began leaving Charme out on the patio in the evenings. She hoped the dog's barking would help the snake from coming into her house. Madame Picot says she had read that snakes try to get into houses at night because they don't like the damp evening air. Well, the night before last, Charme was in the patio worrying a pigeon, or so Madame Picot thought. She heard the dog barking, then that little growling sound she always makes when she's cornered something like a mouse or a bird. There are so many pigeons in the city it is no wonder that Madame Picot did not think twice about why Charme was barking. Anyway, she was barking and growling and barking some more when Madame Picot heard Monsieur Duncan's patio door open. It was late at night, and Madame Picot never bothered to get up to check what was happening. Charme often barked and carried on if a pigeon had foolishly chosen to roost in her tree or under her eaves. Well, right after Madame Picot heard Monsieur Duncan's patio door open, she heard Monsieur Duncan call out to Charme, the way someone might call to a dog if they had a bone or one of those little doggy treats to give them. And instead of being alarmed, Madame Picot was relieved, thinking Monsieur Duncan had at last made friends with her dog. Well, the next thing she knew, the barking had stopped, which is what one might expect of a dog that has just gotten a treat and made friends. The next morning, when Madame Picot was returning from Guy's with her loaf of bread, she met Monsieur Duncan with his pillowcase. The snake, he told her, was feeling much better, and he was taking it back to school. As she does every morning while she is waiting for her coffee to boil, she cut off the ends of her morning baguette for Charme. When she went to the patio, she discovered the dog was gone. So now you know. Know what? Monique asked. That Monsieur Duncan's snake ate Madame Picot's dog. Monique studied her hands for a moment. Just as her mother had said, the story was so fantastic. Who could believe it? So what will happen now? Monique asked. Nothing, I suppose, said Madame Renaud, getting up to put on her coat to go out to buy bread. Madame Picot could find herself another dog, I guess. If it barked at night, the snake could be sick again. But who knows, maybe Charme dug a hole near the rose bushes and escaped. Maybe, replied Monique. But she knew, just as her mother knew, that Madame Picot's little Charme had been eaten by Monsieur Duncan's snake. So there you have
That's
it.
a great story.
Yeah.
Thank you. So you talk about that, and then you talk about the baguettes, and you kept talking about bakeries and all kinds of
Boulangeries,
food, and making me really hungry. So thank you for that.
Sure, sure.
The significance of opals in the story.
Just, they're magic.
Yeah, I've
You
heard
know.
that a lot.
Yeah,
you know?
that they, so it's a way, it's a gypsy thing as well,
Mhm.
and if if you wear an opal and it cracks, it means your heart is not very good. you know,
That's
and
my
if you
birthstone.
right, yeah.
I also
And
heard if
you know,
you give-
people who it's not their birthstone are not supposed to wear them. You know, it's also seen as a kind of a superstitious thing.
Mhm, I
It was
heard
my
that.
mother's birthstone, and I inherited a bunch of opals, and then we lived in Australia. I bought a bunch of opals, but you know, yeah. So it was just a kind of a real thing. I like real things. I like, you know, well documented things in books. You know,
And
they're fun.
that added a layer of interest too. I
Right.
like that. On page 34, you write, though, there are hard times for the three of them. Her father's illness spread through their house like a malevolent vine, intent on choking them all.
Right.
That writing is just
Thank you.
amazing. It's art. It gets you. It moves you, and I really appreciated that. How did you come up with words like that? Did you redo that 100 times?
Yeah, somebody
Yeah.
asked me recently, how long did this, it takes me a long time to write a book. This book has been around, this book has been around, I started it when we did live in France, and then it's been rewritten dozens of times. It took me a while to realize whose story it was, and of course it's Madame Renaud's story. And it really is the story of a mother learning to let go of a daughter, and in that letting go, to let her both lives open up and be responsive to love, which is what love, you can't do it without that, without being open to it. So that took me a while, and then I did try to sell the book a few years back, and it's a novella. You know, it goes over, it's a classic novella. It goes over a set amount of time. There's one inciting incident that then develops the story. I mean, it follows all of the rules of a novella. So when I first tried to sell it to a publisher, nobody was publishing novellas, you know? And then my husband kept saying, I really like that book. Why don't you get that book out again and redo it, you know? So I would redo it again and again, and it would get better, and, you know, and then just listening to the people talk and you know, being back in Europe a lot, you know, just thinking, well, there is something really wonderful about learning something about a culture through a book.
Definitely.
And you do learn a lot about and it's all real in this book, you know, so you really do learn about a culture in this book. So I got it out, and then novellas have become popular.
They have, yeah.
They have. But two kinds of novellas, and you can look this up. One is soft porn, you know, which it is what I now refer to as a literary quickie, you know. They're short, less than 150 pages or whatever. And the other is Amish novellas, you know, books.
I haven't
And
heard
if
that
you
term.
just Google Amish novellas, literally hundreds of books will come up. And it was like, really? And I've had publishers say to me, soft porn? And I'd say, no. And they'd say, can we move it to an Amish thing? And I'd say, no. It really is a French story. And then I, you know, obviously recently found a publisher who fell in love with it.
Yeah.
Really wonderfully fell in love with it, and kept calling me and saying, okay, I've read it 3 times now. I really want to publish this book. And that took a year of negotiating because of things that happened in their publishing firm, and you know, deciding to finally publish it, you know, so that was nice. And the Amish thing, I don't know, and I'm working with a wonderful communications person who's helping me turn the work I did as the Piedmont Laureate into an online class.
Perfect,
The
yeah.
work that I did. And she happens to be African American, and you know, I was laughing about this book, and I said, you know, and can you believe that there's these Amish novellas, and they're like hot? And she said, yeah, my mother reads them. And I went, what? And she said, she reads 3 a week. She said, every birthday, Christmas, Mother's Day, whatever, I just buy her a whole stack of them. She said, oh yeah, I know all about this. And I went, I thought that was a
Interesting.
joke. Yeah, it wasn't,
Yeah.
anyway.
Never heard
So
of
is there the symbolism for the bread and feeding people? Is that like the mother and her daughter? Is there a
It's more
symbolism to that?
it's more French. You know, the French love food. I mean, you know, the French, like the whole, like when Madame Renaud, in the course of the conversation, it says, you know, next to the butcher's, next to the place where they, you know, where they stuff the lamb chops with
Yeah.
that is exactly a conversation that you would have in France or in Belgium.
We need to go.
You do need to go.
Together.
Yes. Yeah, we will go.
So
Yeah.
you can help me
So,
out
I mean,
there.
you know, that whole central, and I also love the concept of eating, the importance of food.
Mhm.
And for many, many years, I was also, I wrote for a number of magazines and newspapers in the country about food. So, you know, food, and of course I was in France writing about food for magazines, you know. And I was also a restaurant critic for a while. So, you
Well,
know.
it's beautifully done, and a friend of mine who couldn't be here right now, but she owns Alimentero Bakery, and
Ah.
she made the bread.
Oh, great.
So there's
Oh,
a
I'll have
couple
to
of
taste
baguettes.
it, yeah.
It's wonderful bread. And it's just a whole different lifestyle and how they eat and why they eat, and they're not fat either. Like, you know.
No, and the other thing is, what I really love about the whole bread thing and the shopping thing that, you know, you see take place in this book, and then of course there's, you know, Madame Fleury, who's unwell and who likes Monsieur Buffard's bread, which is terrible bread, but anyway.
Very stale.
Yeah, very stale. And, you know, I think what I took away from the time we lived in France, and also from the time we lived in Australia, we lived in Australia twice, once for a year and once for part of a year, is a sense of, you know, my husband was working at QUT, Queensland University of Technology in Brisbane, Australia, when we lived there. And the first week we were there, you know, he was typical American professor, university professor, and he, end of the day, comes and he starts taking everything off of his desk and stuffing his research into his briefcase, and somebody came in and said, "What the hell are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm getting ready to go home." And he said, "Why are you taking your briefcase?" And he said, "Well, because, you know, I've got," and he said, no, we don't do that. We don't do that, you know, and you leave that here. You leave work, you leave your work. That's what leaving work is.
I've heard that the rest of the world does that.
Yeah, it's
you
really
know,
crazy.
but-
And so that wonderful sense of, you know, it was really that it became so important of your day as a woman was spent finding the best food for your family. And even though you didn't cook it.
Or
you know,
clean.
or clean, right, you know, you didn't cook it or clean it. I mean, you just got it. And that's the other thing, you know, you went to the baker. If, you know, if I were having a dinner party, I would go to Guy's, and I left his name in the book because he actually died shortly, right before we left.
Oh.
And sort of as an honor to him, I left his name in the book. I would go to Guy's, and I would say, "Oh, you know, having a dinner party tonight, or having aperitifs, and I want something savory or whatever." He would say, "I have fresh, you know, I've da-da-da, how about if I make a this?" And I'd say, "Okay, fine, make that, I'll pick it up at 5, you know."
Wow.
So it was all like I could go and order. I want an asparagus quiche, or I wanted this, or I wanted that.
Nice.
And it was done. I mean, I didn't do any of that. So I just wrote about hunting and gathering. I mean, you know, because that's what they do. And even, you know, it's a different way to live, and it's actually quite nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
I bet.
Sounds it.
Yeah, but I mean, can you imagine having that conversation at the Harris Teeter, you know?
No.
And I'll be having 6 for dinner, and we'll be having, you know, roasted beets with it. So what will you stuff my chicken with, you know?
No.
No. doesn't
Try that
happen.
and get back to me.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they do make suggestions for me, but no, they don't. cook
Not
dinner.
like
They
that.
will steam your lobster, but
Right, or.
the lobsters don't really look alive. So
No, no. So I mean, I have to remind myself. It was wonderful to once again have to deal with this book and to, you know, have it come out and to remind myself that's a lovely way
what
to
an
live.
experience you had.
Yeah,
It's a
bless
lovely
and
way.
What are you
to live.
working on now?
What am I working on now? I'll tell you what I'm working on now. I'm also a visual artist, which is not unusual for writers to also be visual artists. And, you know, I have been called by many editors who've worked with me as a very visual writer. Not, you know, it's not surprising. But I'm also a visual artist, and I have been invited to be one of 7 international artists who are both we're all dual artists, for a special exhibition in Brisbane, Australia in
Oh
November.
wow,
Oh,
good for
nice.
you.
So anyway, we've all been asked to use our 2 forms of art in an unusual way. And so I've been struggling with that, and I have another book that's making the rounds about a music festival. And I had kind of thought, you know, maybe it's time to slow down. I have these 2 wonderful grandchildren. I'll go back to writing short stories and life will be good. And anyway, to make a long story short, there is one story that I have never written about. And that's what I'm working on now. And I'll tell you the story of it. And the story is in 1902, a young woman who was probably in her mid-20s was found beaten up and unconscious on the train station platform in Macon, Georgia. At that time, Macon, Georgia was a hub to, you know, get to other places, to get to Florida or wherever. And so it was a big railroad hub. And, you know, it is no longer, but it was then. Anyway, the police found this young woman. She had no purse, no wedding ring, no identification on her. And they took her to the local hospital, and the doctors examined her, and she was quite pregnant, and they realized that she was not going to make it. And she never regained consciousness, and they made a decision to try to save the baby. And they did a C-section, and that was my father.
Oh my
Wow.
goodness.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the theme of the show in Australia that we all have to respond to is the inevitable past. So I've always, all of my siblings, our paternal grandmother has haunted us in a way, you know, and no one ever claimed the body. And so this book is about, I'm creating my grandmother. I'm making up her story as to who she was, why she was in Macon, why she was pregnant, what was going on, and why nobody claimed the body. And then, so the book is in two parts, the grandmother story and then the granddaughter story. And the granddaughter, the grandmother, I realized halfway through this process, and also Australia called me up and said, oh, FYI, you've got a 30-foot wall in the gallery. And I'm like, 30-foot wall? Wow, that's a big wall. That's, you know, that's an awful big wall.
I have some ideas.
Yeah, no, and so I like symbolism a lot, clearly from my writing, I like symbolism a lot. And so one day I was sitting in my office thinking, 30-foot wall, and I'm going to carry the artwork with me, which I've done when I've been in shows in other countries, because having them shipped is like, you run the risk of losing them, whatever. And so I realized that the opening page of the book, that the grandmother is speaking from the grave. She's dead, and she basically says in 180 words, which is important, that it's time for you to understand who I am and who you are because of all that happened to me.
Wow.
And then all of a sudden I was sitting there and I thought, oh, she's dead. How big is a shroud? And the shroud is 5 yards long, 60 inches wide. And so I'm creating the grandmother shroud and have embroidered each of the words of from the text from the first page of the book on antique linen handkerchiefs, and then cut them into like small shapes, and then baticked a DNA strand through. It's actually, mine is over 20 feet because I needed the extra space. Over 20 feet of heavy linen, and then I'm now meticulously sewing each of those leaf-like shapes onto this
How
piece
do you
of linen.
think about that stuff?
I know,
labor
but
of
you know,
love.
that's really, you know, as a gallery owner said to me, you're just weird. And I went, yeah. And I haven't embroidered since I was 10 years old, so I had to learn how to embroider. And anyway, so that's what I'm working on. And the book is half done. It won't get done before I get to Australia, but I'm actually going to Macon, Georgia in 2 weeks to do some research about Macon, because I like real things.
Yeah.
So I'll
That's
go
such
to
a
Macon.
labor of love too. I
Yeah.
mean, that's gonna.
And it was
That's
nice.
wonderful.
I sent the first 100 pages to my sister, and she called me and she said, oh my gosh, I feel like I have a grandmother. I know her now, which was really nice.
Did you ever
But-
do your DNA or anything like that?
well, I haven't yet, you know, but it's interesting, but you
Yeah.
know. So anyway, so that's what I'm working on now, is that book.
That sounds
Awesome.
beautiful. Really.
Yeah. Yeah,
Well, I
so-
thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Does
Yes.
anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, does anybody have questions or comments or?
I had a question. If
Sure.
the way you were living in France like that, is that by shopping every day and dealing with what you're dealing with? Is that ultimately, is it like a lot more expensive to live that way, or was it?
No, not really, because you have no waste.
Okay.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
how many times do we
you
go to
eat what you buy.
Yeah.
And you know, what you buy is all very high quality. I mean, you know, it's all hand picked. The other thing is you're not supposed to touch the vegetables. You know, you just say, you know, they pick them out. But some places you can get them yourself. And I'm used to like going to the Harris Teeter and
Right.
getting my lemons, getting my, you know, no, we don't touch, you
Okay.
know. So they do that, and they're like, you know. The other thing which is really funny is the hardest word to say in French is one. You know, and I would go and I would try to get one of something, and then I would go like this one, and they would go,
Oh, geez.
what are you saying?
Duh.
And I would
Don't
go,
they understand about this?
no,
Duh.
they don't, because in French, this is one, this is one,
Oh.
this is two, this is three, this is four, and this is five.
Oh.
And as soon as I understood 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I got what I wanted. But the kids used to laugh because I'd come home and there would be 2 chickens and 2 loaves of bread, and you know, they say, "Oh, Mom went shopping
How
again."
funny.
Until I learned, you know, 1, but the 1 is like this, 2 is like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Oh.
Yeah,
1, 2.
1, 2.
You have to rotate.
Yeah,
Okay.
3, 4, 5.
In
Yeah.
Italian, we just go to 2 fingers over.
Right, but 1 did not work, you know, this did not work.
That's
So,
funny.
yeah. And, you know, my other books are fun too. Well, not as much fun as this one. Lillian's Garden is about dysfunctional family in the late 60s and mid 60s, and how sometimes women take care of everyone but themselves.
Mhm.
And Ashwin's Rug is a series of linked stories about 10 people who are on the same prayer rug and how it changed their lives.
That's a fun book.
That is a
It's
fun book.
fun
That is a
I
very
read
fun
that
book, yeah.
early on.
Any other questions? Anybody have a book club? If you have a book club, I'm happy to come.
Oh. Yeah, our book clubs are here.
They didn't want, they had one, they just didn't invite me.
Ah, they didn't invite you? Oh, well, I'll call them up and tell them, look, they've lost their